Welcome to Whispers and Confessions. There might be a twist waiting, so please make sure to watch until the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Let's begin right away.
My name is Natalie, and I'm a 29-year-old office worker with an unusual fixation. I'm obsessed with tongues, not just in a romantic way, but in a deep, almost scholarly fascination with their movement, texture, and color. While others might notice someone's hands or neckline first, my eyes are instantly drawn to their tongue whenever their lips part. I analyze everything: its aesthetics, length, flexibility, how it might move. And then I saw it, the tongue that would change everything. It belonged to Russell Thompson, our marketing team manager. At 35, he's the kind of man who casually rolls up his crisp shirt sleeves to his elbows, with lips that look like they were sculpted by Michelangelo himself. I first noticed him at an office party, and the way he absent-mindedly moistened his lips with his tongue while sipping wine became permanently etched in my memory. From that moment on, I couldn't take my eyes off his mouth. Every little movement he made with his tongue sent shivers down my spine. I was hopelessly drawn to him, despite knowing he was married. This obsession wasn't new to me. It started with my first kiss at 17. That moment when our tongues met, that incredible sensation of warm, wet flesh moving in my mouth, it awakened something in me. It wasn't about the kiss itself. It was all about the tongue. Nothing else, not holding hands, embracing, or even sex, could compare. Without tongue contact, everything felt meaningless. For me, love was all about the tongue. After seeing Russell's, I was blind to everything else. The fact that he was my boss's boss and had a family didn't matter anymore. I couldn't fight these feelings. That office party marked a point of no return. The way Russell moistened his lips that evening, such a simple, unconscious gesture, but that glimpse of his red, long, agile tongue against his lips nearly drove me wild. After that, I found myself studying his every movement, how his tongue would roll during presentations, the way he'd wet his lips after drinking coffee, even how he'd play with his straw while having cocktails. His tongue was utterly mesmerizing, and I knew I had to have it. Initially, I contented myself with observation. I'd watch him drink his morning coffee, never miss a chance to see him take a sip of water during meetings, and deliberately choose the same lunch spot just to watch his mouth. Then fate stepped in. I ran into him alone in the office hallway. "Natalie, buried in work?" he asked. My eyes locked onto his lips, catching a glimpse of that perfect tongue as he spoke. "Yes, very," I managed to reply. When he smiled, his tongue made a brief appearance, and I felt my knees go weak. After that encounter, I grew bolder. I engineered casual run-ins, positioned myself next to him at company events, always watching for my chance. Finally, it came. After a team dinner, Russell, slightly tipsy, turned to me. "Natalie, where's home for you? Need a lift?" My heart skipped a beat. This was my moment. "Oh, that's not necessary, Russell." I began, but he insisted, "Don't worry about it. We're headed the same way anyway. Come on." Next thing I knew, I was in his car, the enclosed space filled with the sound of his breathing, my eyes glued to his lips. "Natalie." The way he said my name made me shiver, and when he turned his head, I caught another glimpse of that tongue. It was the most exhilarating moment of my life. "Russell." I drew out each syllable deliberately. When our eyes met, I could see his resolve wavering, trying to maintain professional boundaries. But I wanted to shatter those boundaries. "How about one more drink?" After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Why not?" We found ourselves in a dimly lit bar with soft music playing in the background. I watched, transfixed, as he raised his glass. It played out exactly as I'd imagined. When Russell tilted his glass back, his tongue grazed the rim ever so slightly. An involuntary shiver coursed through my legs. He caught my stare and raised an eyebrow. I played it off, shaking my head with feigned embarrassment. Oh, it's nothing. I just admire how effortlessly cool you look when you drink, Russell. He set down his glass with an easy smile, then slowly ran the tip of his tongue across his lips. In that moment, my decision was crystal clear. That tongue would be mine. That night is seared into my memory, not that I ever wanted to forget it. From then on, Russell's lips consumed my every thought. As we were getting ready to catch a cab after leaving the bar, he turned to me. "Care for a walk, Natalie?" The invitation was thinly veiled, an excuse to keep talking. Russell must have sensed what was on my mind. I nodded silently and fell into step beside him. When the crisp night air swept past us, Russell unconsciously wet his lips, and my breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Natalie," Russell stopped in his tracks and fixed me with an intense gaze. "Do you have feelings for me?" His direct question made my stomach drop, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "What makes you say that?" Russell let out a deep breath. "I've noticed the way you watch me." Busted. For a split second, I froze, but there was no turning back now. If anything, this could work in my favor. I let a seductive smile play across my lips. "What about you?" I met his gaze head-on. "Are you attracted to me?" Russell didn't say a word. He just held my stare. Then, slowly, he smiled. And with deliberate sensuality, he moistened his lips with the tip of his tongue. The sight drove me wild with desire. I couldn't hold back anymore. When Russell leaned back against the wall, I made my move. Not wanting to be too obvious about my intentions, I played up the tipsy act and casually pressed against him. I held my breath. Russell's face was inches from mine. His lips were right there. "Natalie, Before he could finish, I pressed my lips to his. His body went rigid for a moment, but I didn't let up. I pushed my tongue against his lips, slowly sliding inside. A jolt of electricity shot through me. When Russell's tongue responded, electricity coursed through my entire body. Instead of pushing me away, he drew me in deeper. Our tongues met in a passionate embrace, and I trembled with pleasure. This was everything I'd been fantasizing about. "Natalie." Russell breathed my name between heavy pants. But I only held him tighter, our tongues intertwining more desperately. I was addicted to the sensation. Time seemed to stop. I only came back to reality when I realized his hands were gripping my waist, his breathing ragged and harsh. "We can't do this." I refused to hear those words. I silenced him with another kiss, pushing my tongue deeper into his mouth. I needed to taste every inch of his tongue. He tried to resist one more time, but it was futile. We'd already crossed that line. That night, we ended up at a hotel. All I could think about was making him mine. The drive to the hotel felt endless. Even in the taxi, I couldn't keep my hands off his tie, and Russell didn't stop me. He just stared out the window with a deep sigh, but I knew it was anticipation, not regret, that made him sigh. The moment we got to the hotel room, I couldn't wait another second. Before the door had even clicked shut, I pulled him closer by his tie. Russell pushed me against the wall with a sharp intake of breath. And then his tongue was on mine again, almost feral in its intensity. When his lips claimed mine, I shuddered with pleasure. The tip of his tongue traced my lips before delving inside. I wrapped my tongue around his hungrily, as if I'd been starving for this moment. Deeper and deeper we went, consuming each other completely. My fingers fumbled with his shirt buttons while Russell's hands gripped my waist forcefully. The passion between us grew more intense, the air thick with desire. "Natalie." That single whispered word drove me crazy. Instead of responding, I captured his tongue between my teeth, gently biting and sucking. It was absolute perfection. I never wanted to stop. Our clothes hit the floor piece by piece until we finally tumbled onto the bed. Russell's lips traced down my neckline, sending shivers through my body as I gently ran my fingers through his hair. Each time the tip of his tongue brushed against my skin, electricity coursed through me. "Why are you?" Russell muttered between ragged breaths. "Why do you have this fixation with tongues?" I didn't answer with words. Instead, I pulled his face closer and kissed him deeply. That said it all. That night, I claimed his tongue as mine completely. But that's when the real trouble began. If only it could have stayed a one-time thing. After that night, I lost all control. Truth is, I never wanted it to end. Once I'd experienced Russell's tongue, I was addicted. When morning came, I found Russell lying beside me. In the soft daylight, he looked different from the passionate man of the night before. Peaceful, almost innocent. But I knew this tranquility wouldn't last. I slipped out of bed quietly. My head was throbbing, but I felt zero regret. If anything, I craved more. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I studied his features. His lips were slightly swollen, his breathing steady. When I caught a glimpse of his tongue between his parted lips, desire flooded through me again. My hand moved by itself toward his mouth. I wanted to slip my tongue between those lips, to taste him even more thoroughly than last night. But Russell stirred, and I quickly pulled back, settling down beside him. "Natalie." The moment he spoke my name, heat coursed through my body. His voice still carried echoes of our night together. Russell held my gaze for a long moment before sighing deeply. "About last night, do you remember?" I nodded slowly. "Do you regret it?" When Russell didn't answer, just covered his face with another sigh, I reached for his hand. My fingers were trembling, but I fought to keep my voice steady. "Let's do it one more time." His eyes went wide. "What?" His voice held both shock and unmistakable interest. "Just once more." I watched his pupils dilate, felt the slight dampness of his palm against mine. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I spoke from my heart. "I don't want last night to be just a memory." My pulse was racing, but I was done playing games. We'd already crossed that line, and from the moment I'd tasted his tongue, there was no going back. I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. Russell's grip tightened on my hand. With agonizing slowness, he leaned in closer. "Natalie, you're playing dirty." Then his lips were on mine again. That morning, I had him one more time. Looking back, that should have been the end. If only we could have stopped there. Facing Russell at work became torture. No, torture isn't the right word. It was maddening. Having to act professional when all I could think about was his tongue. Russell drew clear boundaries at the office, speaking only when necessary and maintaining a careful distance. But that only made me want him more. I found myself watching him like a hawk. I'd find excuses to walk past his desk with documents to copy, time my lunch breaks to catch the same elevator. But Russell kept his distance. "Natalie, watch yourself." His low voice filled the conference room. His expression was dead serious, lips pressed into a thin line. "Watch myself? How so?" I forced a light laugh, but my heart was pounding at the sound of his voice. "You're the one who needs to be careful." I couldn't keep the flirtatious challenge from my tone. Russell's eyes narrowed, jaw clenching visibly. "Natalie, you said just once more." That was supposed to be the end. His voice was stern, but I caught the slight tremor underneath. "Then why are you so concerned?" Russell had no response. His silence only fueled my desire. Frustration and irritation twisted inside me. After the office party that night, I purposely caught him alone. Maybe it was the alcohol-induced confidence, but I felt particularly bold. "How about another drink?" I asked sweetly. Russell shook his head firmly. "This needs to stop, Natalie." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Anger and frustration surged through me. "Haven't you been thinking about it too?" My voice quavered. Russell's silence spoke volumes. I gave him a bitter smile, fighting to keep my emotions in check despite my trembling lips. "That's rich. I think about it constantly." Russell let out a heavy sigh at my confession, his expression torn. "We're done, Natalie." Those words felt like a knife to my heart. Done? before I'd had my fill? Anger and obsession boiled up inside me. No way in hell was I giving up. An all-consuming fixation took hold of me, making my fingers shake with intensity. After discovering Russell's wife, I began my investigation. It wasn't hard to find information about her. Through casual workplace conversations and the family photo prominently displayed on Russell's desk, I learned about Emma, an elegant woman with impeccable style, wearing a sophisticated beige dress and carrying herself with natural grace. For days, I observed Russell's after-work routine. One evening, I spotted Emma waiting in the parking lot. From my vantage point near the building entrance, I watched as she took Russell's hand when he got into the car, his face characteristically tense. The sight made my blood boil. Why should she have exclusive rights to his kisses? I studied Emma intently, determined to find her weak points. I meticulously tracked Emma's schedule: yoga sessions 3 times weekly, Friday grocery runs at the local grocery store, weekend outings with their son Tommy at the Children's Activity Center. Once I had mapped out her entire routine, I made sure Russell knew about my surveillance. Russell, I approached him, watching his eyes widen with alarm. "Natalie, what exactly are you doing?" I flashed an innocent smile. "Oh, nothing special." His face turned to stone as he snapped, "Natalie, you're crossing a dangerous line here." I couldn't help but smirk, rage bubbling beneath my composed exterior. "A line? That's rich, coming from you. We both know you crossed that line long ago." My voice dripped with dark amusement and burning obsession. Russell squeezed his eyes shut, exhaling deeply before grabbing my wrist. "This needs to stop, Natalie." I gently removed his hand, maintaining my smile. "Sure, I'll stop." But we both knew it was a lie. I had no intention of backing down. With calculated precision, I planned to destroy Emma's perfect little world. Until Russell's lips belonged to me again, I wouldn't rest. His attempts to establish boundaries and distance himself were futile. We'd already gone too far. Once awakened, this kind of desire refuses to be silenced. What Russell didn't realize was that since our night together, thoughts of his tongue consumed me dozens of times daily. The gentle caress, his heated breath, our deep connection. These memories haunted my every waking moment. His attempts to avoid me at work and during company functions only intensified my obsession. Emma lived in her perfect little bubble, devoted to her husband and child, believing she inhabited the safest corner of the world. Little did she know how quickly her carefully constructed reality could come crashing down. My opportunity finally arrived when Russell was scheduled for a business trip. The whole office knew about it, including Emma. But when he suddenly canceled last minute, I took notice. That evening, I positioned myself near his house. Right on cue, Russell appeared. I stepped into his path. "Weren't you supposed to be out of town?" Russell's composure cracked. Glancing nervously around, he whispered, "Why are you following me?" I let a slow smile spread across my face. "Just curious about that last-minute cancellation." Russell sighed heavily, gripping my arm. "This has to end." Instead of pulling away, I leaned in close to his ear. "Is that really what you want?" His silence spoke volumes. I already knew his answer. Drawing him closer, I felt his body tense, but he didn't resist. "Planning to go home and play the perfect husband?" I parted my lips slightly, catching his gaze as I slowly ran my tongue across them. Russell's eyes darkened with desire, even as he glanced around nervously. "Not here," he warned in a husky whisper. I savored his conflicted expression, offering a seductive smile. "Where then?" After a moment's hesitation, he let out a resigned sigh. Without another word, I slipped into his car. In that car, I had Russell again. That night, he didn't push me away. If anything, he was the one who pulled me closer. No words were necessary. Russell wanted me as much as I wanted him. We fell into each other completely, but my desire only grew stronger. I couldn't stop now. More than that, I didn't want to stop. After that day, Russell stopped avoiding me. Our relationship deepened, becoming more intense and clandestine. During office hours, we maintained our professional facade of boss and employee, but at night, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. But you know what they say about secrets. They always come out eventually. And Emma's feminine intuition proved sharper than we'd anticipated. I knew it would only be a matter of time before Emma caught the scent of my perfume on Russell's shirts. When everything finally came crashing down, it happened in the most dramatic way possible. One night, as Russell and I were leaving our usual hotel, Emma was standing there in the lobby. She didn't make a scene. She just stood there, deathly pale, hands trembling. I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. Emma remained silent, but Russell's face strained of all color. "Let me explain," Russell stammered. Emma's bitter laugh cut through the air. "Explain," she said, her voice ice cold. "What could you possibly say to explain this?" I watched her world shatter before my eyes. It felt like watching an inevitable ending unfold. "I will never forgive either of you," Emma declared, giving Russell one final look before walking away. For them, maybe that was the end. But for me, it was just the beginning. I'd already claimed everything that was Russell's. His touch, his breath, his very essence belonged to me now. There was no need to hide anymore. Sure, Russell had lost everything, but I'd gained it all. I felt nothing but satisfaction. After all, that sweet tongue of his was finally, completely mine.